Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Richards and I'm with one of our regular parliamentarians, Martin Vickers, Conservative MP for Cleethorpes and Immingham. Martin, welcome. Thank you for coming along. Just want to start with some of the big issues that have been happening in this last few weeks or so. The European arrest warrant debate in the House of Commons. You were present for that.
I was.
And voted in it, presumably. Did you vote loyally with the government as instructed?
I did indeed, because it was the right thing to do. For a Eurosceptic like me, I think it's probably the first and only time I shall probably support the government on a major European issue.
But there was a great sort of procedural confusion, wasn't there? Nobody in the House seemed to be quite aware what the government was laying before them, what they were voting on. There were these 36 measures that were being put back, that we were going to take back into our law from Europe. And the European arrest warrant wasn't a specific thing to be debated in its own right, as the Prime Minister had promised.
Yeah, it should have been. I mean, it would have made life much easier. It turned into a bit of a shambles, really. But we only needed to pass affirmative resolutions for 12 of these opt-ins, because apparently the others were already incorporated into law anyway. So technically it was correct. But politically, if they'd have just tagged that on the end, it would have been so much easier.
So the House still hasn't had a chance to vote on that arrest warrant individually, as an individual measure.
That's right. As I say, as a Eurosceptic, I'm not usually in the same lobby as the government on these matters, but it is a law and order issue, actually. We want to be able to extradite and deport people and get foreign nationals returned home if they're causing problems over here.
But those are the merits of the bill, the merits of the warrant, rather. But it may well be that British citizens find themselves held and tried in countries with a system of justice and a judiciary that's not quite as swift or as fair or as competent as ours.
There is a small element of risk, I would acknowledge that, but the government have actually tightened up the criteria by which that could happen. They've altered the proportionality, as they call it. In other words, you couldn't be deported to Romania because you had an unpaid parking ticket or something like that. It would have to be a serious issue.
And we'll be using it, presumably, also to be taking people suspected of crimes in this country from other countries.
Absolutely.
Why can't they be tried in the other countries and clog up their prison system instead of ours?
Well, obviously, it depends on the circumstances, but I think everyone would acknowledge that, particularly when you're dealing with security and terrorism and so on, that we need arrangements with all other countries in order to be able to extradite in whichever direction it is.
You're, as you say, you're anti-European. If you were to get your dreams come true and we were to leave the European Union, would you still want to have some sort of international arrest warrant with the other countries?
I think you've got to acknowledge that to have a very tight jurisdiction that just covers the UK or just covers France or an individual country in these days where we're dealing with international crime and so on is just not logical. We've got to have some arrangements certainly with the major powers of how to deal with these things.
Another European issue, there seemed to be further confusion for the poor old Home Secretary, who's had a rather dreadful week, about David Cameron's promise to reduce migration into this country down to the tens of thousands. Clearly that's not an objective that he can achieve, and the Home Secretary rather tried to downplay what had been a promise to merely a comment. That was very uncomfortable.
Yes, I mean, in actual fact, we have delivered in terms of non-EU immigration. That has been reduced dramatically. But whilst we remain a member of the EU with the free movement of labour, it is going to be extremely difficult, and that's obviously one of the key planks of the Prime Minister's renegotiation should we be re-elected next May.
Theresa May had a better week last week, didn't she, the Home Secretary, when you and all of your backbench Conservative fellows rather applauded her for frightening off Norman Baker and making a poor junior minister, a Liberal Democrat junior minister, resign from the Home Office. He said that it was like being a hippie at an Iron Maiden concert.
Yes.
Which would you be, Martin? Would you be hippie or Iron Maiden?
Well, I'm not sure I'd be seen at either of those at my advanced age, but I mean, Norman Baker is a very odd character. He's quite a likeable character, but I think it's got more to do with Norman Baker than Theresa May. The fact is, he's got a relatively small majority. He's been hard pressed by the Conservatives, and he wants to concentrate on holding his seat.
Well, he's a fascinating man, but the real fascinating issue about this resignation is that you, backbench Tories, all cheered your heads off in support of Theresa May, thinking what a wonderful woman she is. Is this making her a much more likely candidate for the leadership of the party?
Well, the leadership will only become vacant, of course. We won't know whether there's vacancy until after the election. If David Cameron succeeds, as obviously I hope he does in taking us to victory, then he will remain for hopefully for a full 5 years. So there won't be a contest. If there were a contest, I'm sure that Theresa would be a candidate.
We'll come to those speculations in a moment. Just one final thing on Europe. Also, in the last few days, the CBI has had its conference and said tremendously strongly that it would be a disaster to come out of the European Union. Now, these are the people who represent entrepreneurship, business, industry, trade in this country. Why on earth would they disagree with you?
Well, what they don't speak on, who they don't speak on behalf of course, the people of Cleethorpes, Immingham, the Grimsby area, and so on. The reality is, in northern provincial towns, people see the situation completely differently. When you're down in London, you can see the entrepreneurial, thrusting, go-ahead immigrant. Of course, there are some of those here, but in the main, it's perceived by the people I represent as a threat to their jobs and their income, because people come over here and are prepared to take the low-paid jobs.
But your constituents' perception isn't necessarily true.
Well,
that might be an easy scapegoat if you're having a rough time.
No, it's not. I mean, the reality is I have to articulate the concerns of the people I represent. And that there is widespread concern that the level of immigration is too high, which I would acknowledge, and indeed I think every political party has acknowledged. Even the Labour Party have acknowledged that they opened the floodgates during their last administration. So there is a balance to be achieved between meeting the demands of industry and ensuring that public services in particular are not overwhelmed.
May I just pick you up on one thing you said there? You're elected to articulate the concerns of your constituents. Many parliamentarians and parliamentary theorists would think that you're elected because they trust your judgment, not that you're going to simply articulate theirs. This is very Edmund Burke. Forgive me, it's a favourite old theme of mine on this.
No, there is a balance between the Edmund Burke argument and what I've just said, the expressing the views of my constituents. Government is there to balance. The Parliament is there to scrutinise and ensure that government is aware of the concerns of people in Cleethorpes and elsewhere.
Well, we'll get back into the Parliament and slightly more tactical politics. You've lost to two of your fellow Conservative MPs have resigned to join UKIP. One of them has been re-elected for Clacton, Douglas Carswell, as a UKIP Member of Parliament. You're probably going to have another one elected as a UKIP Member of Parliament, Mark Reckless in Rochester and Strood. Are you tempted to go to UKIP yourself?
Absolutely in no way. The reality is that I've been a Conservative Party member for 40 years. There's no way I'm going to be disloyal to the party. I am the Member of Parliament for Cleethorpes because it said I was the Conservative candidate on the ballot paper. Most people cast their vote based on the party label. Had I been the UKIP MP for Cleethorpes, I would have had no influence during the last 4.5 years. I wouldn't have had the rail minister up here 2 weeks ago because of the issues to do with rail services in the area. I wouldn't have got Treasury ministers up here and argued the case for reducing Humber Bridge tolls and a score of other issues.
There's an advantage to being part of a big party, but if there's another party with whom you agree more, because the other policies of UKIP are fairly conservative traditional policies on the whole. The only distinction between UKIP that's significant between UKIP and the Conservatives is withdrawal from Europe, with which you agree with them.
But the UKIP can't deliver that. UKIP, in their wildest dreams, would never expect to get more than 8 or 10 MPs. That unless that was the difference between a majority and a minority government. They would have absolutely no influence at all. The Conservatives are the only party who will deliver an in-out referendum.
So you're a Conservative because you need the party machine, as it were, the traditional potential of big
parties. I
parties.
need the party machine, but I also agree with the majority of the policies of the Conservative Party. You hitch your wagon to the one that's going in the direction that you most comfortable with. No one can agree with every policy of any single party.
Has anyone from UKIP invited you out to lunch?
No.
No?
And the other point, of course, is that you not only can UKIP not deliver. You mentioned what are their other policies? What are their other policies? How many people in Cleethorpes could tell me what the pensions, housing, transport, and a score of other policies are for UKIP?
Well, there will be a much reduced manifesto apparently
Paper
coming up
wafer thin, I
on
think.
that. Well, from the last time round. Anyway, and do you expect a very tough campaign in Cleethorpes and Immingham from UKIP?
Well, it would be yes, it'd be a tough campaign. I shall fight it. I shall fight for every vote. I'd dearly like to be the Member of Parliament for another 5 years. We've got a long way to go. The government has rescued the economy. We're now pulling out of. We are pulling out of recession, and I think the majority of people will recognise that and begin to feel the benefits over the next few months.
Why is Grimsby so much talked of as a target seat for UKIP, but Cleethorpes and Immingham less so? They don't seem to be concentrating on that so much.
Why they should feel Grimsby is a target, I don't know. They must speak for themselves. I would regard Grimsby as, I mean, traditionally it's been Labour now since the war. So the reality is they must be the favourites to win. If their vote seeps off to UKIP, of course, it could give the Conservatives a better chance. But you know, it's a Labour Conservative campaign in Grimsby.
Martin, I must stop you there for a moment whilst we go to a break. Please join us again after these short advertisements. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to Martin Vickers, Tory MP for Cleethorpes and Immingham. Martin, we were just discussing the possibilities of Cleethorpes and Immingham as a potential constituency for UKIP, who you're going to be fighting locally. Just one more question on that. If there was a very tight parliament and the Tory party were the smallest party, with the largest party but not with an overall majority, is there a possibility of a Conservative UKIP coalition, or at least a supply and confidence alliance in the next parliament?
I sincerely hope not. What we're aiming for, of course, is a Conservative overall majority. Coalition governments are inherently somewhat unstable. When the Lib Dems and the Conservatives came together in 2010, of course, there was one overriding issue, and that was to rescue the economy. And now that we've got the economy on an even keel, I think we need to quite clearly differentiate ourselves. And the reality is that the more people tend to sort of veer off into Greens, UKIP, or whoever, the more likely, of course, we get an unstable coalition. What we need is stability and moving ahead with the policies that have been in place for the last 4 years.
But that's not going to happen because the electorate is dividing between more and more parties. If you don't, our first past the post House of Commons is a two-party system design.
Precisely.
If you have more and more parties, then there's an almost inevitability that there'll be fractured coalitions.
That is true, but the mindset of people, of course, as they approach a general election is somewhat different to going in to vote in Rochester or Clacton or anywhere else.
The last general election, they didn't elect one party.
Well, the last general election, clearly the Labour Party had lost the confidence of the vast majority of people, and but the Conservatives had not quite got past the finishing post. It was a really uphill struggle. It would have been the biggest turnaround since, I think, the 1930s had they achieved an overall majority. So they did we did remarkably well. I don't know. The mindset of people, they need to concentrate on the fact that who is going to be the government. Either David Cameron or Ed Miliband is going to be on the steps of number 10 the day after the election. And the door will open and one of them will disappear to form a government. That is the choice that people have got. However many MPs UKIP get, and it's only going to be, you know, in single figures almost certainly, and likewise for the Greens. The one certainty in our two-party electoral system is that the Labour leader or the Tory leader will be the Prime Minister, and that's what people have got to focus on.
Well, to bring it much more local here, is you close to your own heart, talking with the Prime Minister. You asked him a question in the House in Prime Minister's Question Times a week or so ago about services here. Were you satisfied with his answers about transport policy in this part of the world?
Oh yeah, it was a very positive reply. As you know, I've been campaigning for the retention of the through trains between Cleethorpes and Manchester. We get the result of that next month. We've had the rail minister up here visiting, and the Prime Minister was very positive. He recognised, as he has done on many previous occasions, the importance of northern Lincolnshire and the Humber region to the national economy. And connectivity, improved transport connections are absolutely vital. He spoke about the possibility of getting our rail network into the electrified network. That's good news. So on the whole, a positive response.
I'm not as technical about these things as you are. What would electrification do? Would it mean that the trains that now run from Cleethorpes to Manchester Airport, do you think they could possibly might even be able to go as fast as steam trains did half a century ago?
Well, of course, they're capable of much higher speeds. The problems, the reason they're restricted to about 60 miles an hour between here and Doncaster is the fact that because of the heavy freight traffic, it's a capacity problem. You can't run freight trains trundling along at 30, 40 miles an hour on the same line as you're running passenger trains that want to go at 100 miles an hour plus. It's a capacity issue. So electrification would improve that because there would be improved capacity along with the wires themselves.
Now this transport infrastructure here is tied into two ideas, one of which is the renewable energy sector, which we'll talk about in a moment. The other is the idea of this great northern powerhouse, that the great cities of the north, Manchester, Leeds, Bradford and indeed Cleethorpes would be united by an infrastructure system that meant that it could operate as one vast, efficient economic entity. It's just a pipe dream, isn't it?
No. Yeah, it's a proven case during the period of the Industrial Revolution. They were almost city-states, Birmingham, Manchester and so on. The focus on the Northern Powerhouse at the moment has been improving road and rail connections between Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool and the North West. But as I have been campaigning for and the government have acknowledged is necessary, we need improved Transpennine east to west connections both on the north and south bank. You can't do everything at once, but I can assure you that it's very much in the government's programme.
But the priority would have to be, I would imagine, between that north and south bank divide, the priority would have to be the north bank because there's a bigger city there.
Well, that is one of the issues, of course, when we're talking about city regions and northern powerhouses and so on. The city region concept is very good. The big cities, Leeds, Manchester, the benefits of the local economy do trickle down into a much bigger area. The problem with us, yes, Hull is 3 times the population of the Grimsby-Cleethorpes area, but it's not an economic powerhouse in the same way as Leeds or Manchester is. So we need improved connections to all of the northern cities so that we get the benefits.
We've been talking about this in the hope of improved economies in Humberside because of renewable energy. You've invited, I think it's Matthew Hancock, the Minister for Energy, to come up and visit this area. One of the things that's clarified that has been the clarification of the Killinghome Triangle, in which ABP was trying to stop Able UK from developing that as a facility to service renewable energy. A mixed parliamentary committee has found that ABP had no case to answer. Why would ABP have brought a case if it didn't have a case to answer?
Well, for their own commercial interests, I suspect that ABP want to maintain their monopoly of the Humber ports. That's a perfectly reasonable point of view for looking at it from their angle.
But it might have been so harmful to the potential for the economy for everybody else.
Which is what has been found at every stage. The planning inquiry, the local council, parliamentary committee, the Department of Transport, they've all found in Able's favour. Now, unless there is a legal challenge to the whole process, Able have got all the permissions they need. I very much hope that we'll hear from them very soon about where they go from here.
Do you know if we have a timetable for that, and when might the concrete be poured, as it were?
Well, of course, there is as you talk about concrete pouring, there is a very considerable construction period, which the last I heard, the hope was that in the spring of next year that will begin. Since the parliamentary committee came to its decision. I've not had the opportunity of a meeting as yet with Able, but I and my neighbouring colleagues are very keen to do that in the near future.
In the last week or so, there's been a strike at Phillips 66, which I think is just in your constituency.
It is, yes.
Now, the strike is about health and safety. The government's laws on health and safety have been relaxed, and those striking think that that puts them in danger. Should there not be more regulation for that industry?
Well, my understanding of that particular dispute is that it's an unofficial dispute. As I understand it, the union themselves are actually...
I think there are two unions involved, Unite and GMB.
Yeah, certainly one of the unions are actually in harmony with the company. So it's something I hope will be resolved in the very near future. I have had some contact with the company, but only really for a very outline briefing.
One of the other aspects of the Phillips 66, and perhaps one of the reasons why it can only be an unofficial strike, is because so many people there are on very short-term contracts, zero-hour contracts, and that this is one of the characteristics of what you call an economic recovery, is that more people are working, but they're working less and very much less securely than they ever did before.
Well, it's not in the particular circumstances we're talking about. The refineries, they've been heavily reliant on contractors for the whole of their existence. That has been normal practice. So, and although some of the contracts are short...
Let me generalise across the economy then. One of the characteristics of George Osborne's economic recovery is that people have much less secure jobs and much less time doing them.
But only as a result of the stability that's now returned to the whole of the national economy is the jobs, we're getting jobs growth and so on. Yes, I want them to be much more permanent jobs. I want them to be well-paid jobs. We are in a relatively low pay economy in this part of the country, and I'd very much like to see that. And the renewable sector that we've been talking about, which has a great number of skilled jobs in it, will lift that. The local colleges and institutions and so on are gearing up for apprenticeships and training and improved skills. So I think we'll see a considerable improvement in that over the next year or two.
But will those skilled jobs not go to people who are already skilled coming in from outside? And this is almost going in a circle back to migration in a much smaller scale. Will those jobs not be going to outsiders?
In the short term, that is the case, and the local guest houses and so on are benefiting from contractors coming in from abroad, sort of from Monday to Thursday at the moment. As we reskill and skill up the younger people, as I mentioned, we are doing in the local colleges and so on, that the demand for foreign labour will disappear, and we'll have our own native workforce.
Final question, just to go back to what we were talking about earlier on, fracturing of parties. Parliament very likely to be, I was going to say well hung, that's the wrong phrase, but next time round.
Yeah.
If David Cameron were to lead the largest party but still not have a majority, would there have to be a leadership election?
No. It would be the status quo, in effect. I mean, if there's a Parliament, there may be another Con-Lib coalition. I don't know. It all depends on numbers.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that prediction. Martin, thank you very much for coming in. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid, for this hot topic. Hope you'll join me again for another one next week, but for now, goodbye.